9 Pagan alternatives to Christmas. Christmas is kind of the big granddaddy of Christian holidays, so much so that even many non-Christians celebrate it. Still, just because it's a big one doesn't mean it's the most awesome one. Paganism is full of weird, intense, and even frightening holidays that put Christmas celebrations to shame. One thing is for certain, there are pre-Christian holidays so hardcore, it's hard to call them anything but metal. Now, let's be clear about one thing, many of the holidays mentioned here are either no longer celebrated, or they are celebrated very differently from how they once were. After all, it's not like human sacrifices are particularly common anymore. It should also be noted that these metal holidays are generally just amazing parties rather than something to actually fear. Just because something is different doesn't mean it's not worth embracing, especially when it's also awesome. So, if you're tired of stockings and Santa, maybe give a few of these hardcore pagan holidays a try. You might find their celebrations are a little more to your barbarous tastes. Krampusnacht. In Germany, Santa has a darker, more distressing counterpart, and his name is Krampus. When children have been bad, Krampus comes around, but he doesn't just lick coal or even take away presents. Oh no, instead he takes birch switches and actually beats bad children with them. If they've been particularly bad, he'll even scoop them up in a sack and take them away so that parents don't have to deal with them anymore. But the holiday doesn't stop there. Every year on the night of December 5th, thousands of people will dress up as the horned, long-tongued, hairy, devil-like Krampus and run around the streets in a parade. This is called Krampusnacht. Traditionally, parents offer these revelers schnapps as a way of keeping them happy and keeping them from taking their kids. Assuming mom and dad want to keep you, that is, so be good, or else Yule. When you hear the word Yule, you probably think it's just a synonym for Christmas. However, modern Christmas traditions are made up of many pagan holidays, including one actually called Yule. You can find a version of Yule in many different pagan religions, usually involving trees, feasting, and gift-giving, much as in modern-day Christmas. Germanic pagans, in particular, knew that the Yule should be celebrated with lots of alcohol, and toasts were to be drunk to the gods, including Odin, after which there would be poetry and song. Think of it as a rocking concert to worship greater beings during the dead of winter. And, as usual, bonfires, animal sacrifices, and dancing were all involved as well. And with the cold, the bonfires were greatly needed if you didn't want to freeze. Summer's end is definitely worth celebrating, or at least the Norse thought so. For the most part, the Norse would take time to worship one god at a time, but also known as winter nights, was a time for the worship of many gods, and that meant doing something big. That something came in the form of animal sacrifice, mainly of pigs but also horses. These sacrifices were done in public, and during them, the blood of the animals was drained out and then used to decorate the bodies and clothes of revelers. The blood was supposed to give good fortune, fertility, and special powers in battle, so it was used readily on everything. Once this was done, the Vikings would do what any great party calls for: drinking. They would drink, celebrate, fight, and have sex nearly constantly for a period of 3 days. That's one serious rockstar lifestyle. Samhain. Most people think of Halloween as a version of All Hallows Eve, but it also has another pagan origin. As the harvest season ended for the Gaelic people, they would celebrate its passing and wish for it to come again by holding a holiday called Samhain. This time was meant to signal an end to the light and a welcoming of the darker part of the year, as well as a sort of festival for the dead and departed spirits. People were supposed to get intensely drunk together, sacrifice animals, and pay tribute to ancestors, as well as those recently passed on. With great feasting and celebrating, people would also take the blood of sacrificed animals and sprinkle it around the homes and on one another. As if to top off this whole bloody festival, a man would dress in a cowhide, then circle the town, breathing in the smoke of bonfires to usher in good luck for the duck season. It kind of puts Halloween to shame, doesn't it? Imbolc. When it comes to pagan holidays, Candlemas, also known as Imbolc, is one of the most important. In early February, pagans celebrate the emergence of light and new growth out of the winter, symbolized as the goddess transitioning from an old woman to a young, attractive, and very fertile one. To celebrate this, every light in the home was to be lit, fires were to be burned, and chants said. Spicy food would be eaten in quantity, and flower baskets were made. Pretty tame, right? The genuinely creepy part comes in some of the lore. At this time of year, the goddess of the hearth and the earth supposedly spreads her legs. Out of her womb climbs a snake, to test the weather and see if it's warm and comfortable enough. And this vagina snake is actually the origin of Groundhog Day. Puts that in a different light now, doesn't it? Walpurgis. This is one holiday that was kind of commandeered by Christians, but that doesn't make it any less awesome. In Germanic Europe, before Christianity took over, there was once a holiday which was celebrated around the end of April, where it was said that the line between the real world and the spirit world became a little hazy. This was called Walpurgis, or Walpurgisnacht. During this time, great fires burned constantly, to keep away spirits that would harm us or do us mischief. Those who practiced magic would gather together on this day to practice their arts and draw on the power of the spirits they could not normally reach. To keep the fae from stealing your spirits, loud sounds had to be made, or very loud music played constantly. Nowadays, it's mostly drinking, feasting, and fun, but originally, this holiday was a bit of a tense time, even if it was a celebration. After all, who wants to be bewitched or attacked by a spirit when they're just trying to party? Mabon. You may know about summer and winter solstice, but the pagans also believed in an autumn equinox that was pretty badass in its own way. Mabon, a celebration of the autumn equinox, gets its name from a Welsh god, and it is still celebrated by Wiccans and neo-pagans even today. It may not have been called that in ancient days, but the celebration still existed. Druids, in particular, used it as a time to celebrate the Green Man, who was a bit of a partier, as well as being lord of the forest. He also happened to be the god of male fertility, so lechery and debauchery was not unheard of during this time. To worship him, there would be great feasting and dancing, as well as tons of drinking and music, the likes of which modern musicals only wish they could emulate. It may not be quite so hardcore nowadays, but Mabon is still full of dancing, music, eating, drinking, and debauchery, if you know where to look. Beltane. When the summer solstice rolls around, the Gaelic people believe it's time to throw a little party, and that party is known as the Beltane Festival. In ancient times, Beltane was seen as an occasion for celebrating the growth of crops, cattle, and even people, and this was done with feasting and fires. We're not talking a little fire here either. Instead, families, towns, and cities would light a massive bonfire, which they believed would strengthen everyone, and sometimes sacrifice animals to it. Then they would take their cattle and dance around the fires and let the smoke envelop them. They would lead through the flames, feast, and celebrate fertility, oftentimes with lots and lots of sex and booze. Beltane is still celebrated today by some Wiccans and neo-pagans, and still sometimes involves sex and booze, nudity, and dancing around a fire, sometimes while painted red. Basically, Beltane festivals were and are still killer parties. Lunar Sod. What better way to welcome in the harvest season than by having a massive funeral? Well, at least that's what the Gaelic people thought. Lunar Sod is a celebration of the goddess of your crops, who must die in order to nourish you. To honor this process, there is an athletic competition, including fighting, as well as a feast and a funeral procession done over the course of several days. A sacred bull would also be sacrificed, and even though it was a party, everyone would be solemn, respectful, and would look at this whole time as a way to reflect on death as well as life-giving food. This celebration is still held today, in the same place as it was held long ago, and while feasting is a main focus, the cloud of death still hangs over partiers.